On today's show, we talk to Segun Lawson, CEO of Thor Explorations, a mining company that operates gold mines in West Africa. Segun's got some crazy stories, including riding off into Nigerian jungles on the back of a motorbike, trying to find $250,000 in 30 days, and getting food poisoning from some dodgy chicken in a desert in Burkina Faso. It sounds like it should be a film, and it probably will be one day. You're going to absolutely love it. I promise you, Segun's story is phenomenal and will blow you away. So, here we go. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Segun Lawson.
Hi, Dom. Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Good to have you, Segun. So, I'm really excited about having you on because I think our listeners are going to find what you do fascinating. So, a brief overview. You guys, so you run a company called Thor Explorations, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and you guys essentially do a few different mining operations in West Africa. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. You know, we're a gold exploration company at the moment with projects in West Africa. We have a project in Senegal, a project in Burkina Faso, and our most advanced project is our project in Nigeria. When I say we're gold exploration, we've been looking for gold and we found some.
Amazing.
And now we're looking to go from exploration to production. So we're obviously finishing a feasibility study, which all the banks need to lend you money so we can start building later on this year. And then subsequently, we hope to produce our first bar of gold.
Amazing. Okay, so you guys actually do that. I've got no idea how this works, and I expect most of our listeners will have no idea how this works. But, I mean, to me, it sounds like a pretty complicated experience. And I think you guys started in 2011, is that right?
Yeah, in fact, we started in 2010. We went public in 2011. We started in 2010 as a little sort of a partnership, which was a consultancy, trying to find companies like, I guess, what we are now, that we could consult for and find projects for in West Africa. But during that process, a lot of people we found extremely difficult, and it was so hard to keep track of people and chase up people. We realized that it took pretty much the same amount of energy to do that for yourself. So set up your own company and pick up your own licenses. So we went ahead and we changed from a consultancy company to an actual mining exploration and development company.
Wow. To me, right, that sounds like a massive step up in terms of raising money, the logistics, et cetera, but presumably the other side of it is it's a lot more lucrative as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we're not producing gold yet, so we're not generating revenue. So you've got to convince investors that what we're using their money for is going to create a lot more value at a certain moment in time. And obviously, mining is capital intensive and it has a long gestation period. So a lot of investors don't want to do this. It's risky. We're in risky jurisdictions. We're in jurisdictions that aren't really well known here in the West, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Nigeria. But on the flip side of that, these areas are very prospective and underexplored. And they've got very, very, very valuable pieces of land with all sorts of natural resources in them, which was the underlying sort of motivation for me, knowing that Nigeria being a second home for me, being home, and sort of the UK being home as well. I fit in there just as easily as I fit in here. So that was sort of a competitive advantage I had.
So let's go back to when you were doing this consulting and you make the decision to actually become the miners yourself. Presumably then when you do that, you kind of think, okay, there's a lot of stuff we've got to do now to actually get to the stage where we're going to produce those bars of gold, right? So that, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking that is almost such a huge task that, if you've got any kind of sanity, you probably wouldn't do it. No offense. But it's like a huge operation to take on, isn't it?
Yeah, and if I had stopped and actually planned it out and thought ahead to all the different things I needed to do, I probably wouldn't have gone ahead with it.
Yeah.
I can tell you chronologically how things happened. We were consulting for a company in Nigeria, and he had a very early stage gold project, and basically we were taking samples, doing all the mapping, letting him know how prospective it was. And then when it got time to get paid, there were certain delays in getting paid, and then he didn't have the money, and then he was like, "Would you take some shares instead?" And then, I was going to Nigeria for 6 weeks at a time, living in the jungle, getting on the back of motorbikes to some very remote areas, hiring locals who didn't know what we were doing. And, this took months. And then I just thought I remember from our first paycheck from this guy, we went and looked at another project in Sierra Leone, and that was even more difficult than Nigeria. It had some waste material from an old mine that had been mined in the 80s before the war, and obviously technology has vastly improved since then. And so there was still a lot of low grade gold in there that with modern technology, you could extract. But this waste material was probably about 10, 12 feet high piles of sand, and it was probably the size of about 4 football pitches. And it had been sitting there for 20 years, and everyone who'd come to try and process this stuff and get the gold had just got into a local dispute with a local chief, and they wanting like huge amounts of money up front. So the sad thing was, these guys were sitting there in abject poverty and literally sitting on a gold mine, and still to this day, no one's processed that. And then
and that just because of the greed of the chief that controls that area.
Literally. And then our big break came. We had a bit of money left, and we were looking at some geological maps, and we were like, Senegal was looking really good. And we went to Senegal, went to the ministry, looked at what was available. But while we were there, someone in the ministry had a cousin who had a license, had an uncle who had a license, and it was next to the biggest discovery in Senegal, and he had done some work on it already. So it wasn't like he was just sitting on this thing like the chief in Sierra Leone or the guy in Nigeria. He had actually done some work and wanted it developed. And then he wanted he had, a few big companies trying to buy it off him, but he knew that all they want to do was say, "Oh, we'll do the work and we'll earn a certain percentage and we'll earn more and more." And obviously I knew his mentality a lot more, which was after dealing with a lot of West Africans, and I knew cash was king. So I literally offered him $250,000. I offered him some shares, so he would still keep 20% of the project. And I told him I'd pay him in 30 days. And obviously I didn't have $250,000 and I didn't have a public company. Anyway, I got back to London and I took my time, changing writing the agreement. So while I was trying to raise the money, and then after we signed, I had 30 days to find $250,000. And then on like the 28th day, I asked him for a 1 week extension. And what really saved us was all I had was a website at the time, and he had only ever met me and my partner, so he didn't know how big a company we were and all that. So he wanted to fly to London and do his due diligence. And the British embassy or British consulate in Senegal was so overbooked, they were going to take 3 months to get an appointment. And he really wanted his 250 grand. So he was like, "Okay, forget it. I'll do the deal without checking up on you." And it was in that 1 week when I was doing the extension, I was presenting to a Canadian bank called Canaccord, and I was talking them through the project and my vision for the company, and they really liked it, and they knew a potential investor that they wanted to introduce me to the next week. So that meeting went so well, and as I left that meeting, the guy who actually took me to the meeting, I didn't realize was so rich. He was like, "Whoa, I've never seen a reaction like that. I'll write you that 250 grand check." And he literally on the phone right there and then transferred me the money. And that was my big break. Yeah. And so I got that 250 grand. So as elated as I was, it was also quite depressing because it came in and sat in my bank account for about 2 hours. And then I wired it straight to Senegal. and then I was back to square one. But what it meant was I actually had a project in Senegal, which had some value, which was next to the biggest discovery in Senegal. It had he had done some work to show that there was potentially a lucrative amount of gold there, and it got the company up and running. And yeah, that's how it all started.
Amazing, amazing. So I got a couple of questions there. I mean, first of all, what a story! But you let's just actually clarify one thing. When you say discovery, that just means that people have found gold there before. Is that right?
Yeah. So when I say discovery, it means so there's a literally Randgold, one of the biggest African gold mining companies, next door, 5 kilometers away. They'd spent about $30 million drilling the ground and proving economic quantities of gold there. And we were on a very similar structure, but it hadn't been drilled, but the soil had been tested. And this soil had this gold anomaly in it that ran for like 8 kilometers. So it was the fact that it was so close to Randgold and it was in the same orientation and same geometry as Randgold's, it was highly likely there was something underneath there, but we just needed money to
Right.
drill it. Yeah.
So when you look at the geological maps, so I know nothing about this, but I'm guessing you can sort of see from the geology of an area whether or not it's likely to have gold there. Is that right?
Um, yeah, but it's not that mathematical because if it was, every geologist would be a billionaire. It's it's you can see by so age of the rocks. Then you look at certain things that happened. You know, there have been fault lines that have come in and displaced, moved the earth, and which has caused disruption and fluids to come in, and when they cool down, crystallize into gold. You know, things like that. Or look at a shear zone, for example, which I'm getting a bit technical here, where one side of the earth has been pushed up and the other side hasn't moved, and that's what causes it. So you look for things like that.
Okay.
But then when you do that, you still use other techniques. You still have to sample the soil. And even if there's gold in the soil, you don't know if it's coming from underneath or if it's been washed down there, if you're on the side of a valley, for example. So there are a lot of things that have to be overlain, which is what made this project so attractive, was because yes, there were a lot of things that had to be proven, but the fact that it was bang on this shear zone, it was 5 kilometers away from this huge resource. It was, it was in a known geological package. It was just, it was just right there. I just had to get it. Yeah. So
This is not like what you see in the films in the 1800s in America, where guys are like sitting in a river with a pan, sifting through for gold. I mean, I guess it's a lot more technical
no,
than that
it's a lot more
nowadays.
technical than that. We're looking for stuff, that goes, a couple of 100 meters underground. We're looking for stuff that's not visible to the naked eye. We're looking at stuff that's literally grams per ton. So you think of a ton of sand, and you're looking for a gram of gold in it. You know, so yeah, it's a lot more technical.
Yeah, yeah. So going back to this guy, you go over to Senegal and you say, oh, and by the way, I think we should clear this up for everyone if they may not realize. So you're actually Nigerian, right?
Yeah,
But educated and live in the UK. So
yeah,
so when you're saying you kind of it's home for you and you understand West Africa, that's
yeah.
what you mean, right?
I don't sound Nigerian, but yeah, obviously because I went to boarding school in the UK. But yeah, I'm Nigerian, so and obviously being West African, I fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you go over to this guy in Senegal. I love this story. It's crazy. And this kind of, for me, sums up the entrepreneurial journey so well. And that's why I really wanted to get you on the show. But you go out and you say, I'll get you $250,000 in a month. And you don't have $250,000, but you've just got this blind faith that you're going to be able to come up with it, right? That's your thinking.
yes. I mean, it was like, what do I have to lose? I go back. If I don't get this $250,000, what do I have to lose? I lose the project, which I didn't have in the first place. And on the flip side of it, the motivation to get the $250,000 is if I don't get this $250,000, I don't have a livelihood. It's literally that simple. I'd chosen this career path and I was determined to make it work. And I literally summarize that getting that course of $1 million. But let's say it took sort of 30 days to sign the agreement. So I remember I was out there in November, took 30 days, so just before Christmas. Then I told him I was shutting down for Christmas. So I did shut down for Christmas, came to January. To sign the MOU. Then in January, we set up again to finish the JV agreement. And during that JV agreement, there were this JV agreement was like 20 pages. So there were a couple of things that were obviously sticking points. And at one point, his lawyer was like, look, rather than keep sending emails back and forth, I think you should just come down and sit face to face and come back to Senegal, sit face to face, and we iron out these issues. And I literally remember thinking how broke I was and online.
So this is before you went to Canada?
This is before I went to Canada, yeah. So I was still a private company. And I literally logged on to HSBC and got a £3,000 overdraft. And it was approved. I was shocked. Corporate overdraft. And I bought myself a flight. And I got a hotel. And then we ironed out the final terms. But the reason I'm saying this, while all this was going on, I was still going and presenting and pitching and going to banks and
trying to find that
the quarter, yeah. And when I went back to Senegal to iron out the few points, I still had to put on that poker face that I had it, but I wasn't happy with these terms and all that. And then I came back to London, and then London, I still remember that January, February, it was pretty rough. I was, I'm not the typical, at that time, how old was I? Yeah, I was early 30s, Nigerian guy, trying to raise money for a project in West Africa. I'm not the typical mining company. So you're presenting to all these investors who, a lot of them just didn't even take the call. And then the ones that did take the call were like, am I really going to give this guy a couple of $1 million to get this thing up and running?
I mean, that you've got so much going against you there, your age, your inexperience. That's a hard sell, I imagine.
Yeah, it was a very hard sell, and it still is a hard sell. I mean, now we're 9 years later, 8 years later, and we found a lot of gold, and we have a valuation over $50 million, and we need to raise money, and it still is a hard sell. I get rejected. For every dollar I raise, I've probably been rejected 100 times still today. Yeah.
Wow. So the clock is ticking down here on your 30 days. And all the time you're saying to this guy, yeah, I've got the money, but you need to make the terms better to buy yourself more time, right? But I mean, you must have been not sleeping pretty much every night and thinking, where am I going to find this money? I'm getting rejected all the time. And when it gets to, so you said it was day 28 or whatever when you were in Canada. I mean, in the run up to that, you must have been pretty sure that you weren't going to get the money as the clock ticked down closer.
Oh yeah, definitely. But now talking about it, I actually remember these times. I remember like someone would be like, "Oh, you've got to meet this guy. He's worth X million or X 100 million, and this is the kind of punt he takes, and $500,000 is nothing to him." And then the guy would email him and copy me in, and then obviously the investor would reply, and he would say something like, "Okay, let's meet. Let's say today's the 1st of May, for example." He'd be like, "Okay, yeah, I'm in London on the 17th of May. Yeah, I'd love to hear it." So even though you hadn't raised the money, there was always some carrot somewhere that hopefully, you had a couple of weeks. So even when I was talking to the Senegalese guy, and in the back of my mind, I was like, if I could just stall him to the 17th of May, for example, till this guy comes into town and I knock that meeting out of the park. And then I'll have my $250,000. So there was always something like that going on constantly. I even remember once I went to meet this guy this super loaded guy in Knightsbridge. And he was just like, "Oh, I love your energy, young, and how did you find this project? And you actually went into Africa and got this, and this is just the thing I'm in." And he was in like some penthouse apartment in Nice. I left and I went to a pub thinking, yeah, okay, great, sorted. And then he just introduced me to like some advisor of his who had just structured something where pretty much they took the project from me and then I worked for them. And yeah, it was just so gutting. But there were always constantly experiences like that. So it wasn't a case of, I have no idea where this money's going to come from, which is true. I didn't, but it was like there was just a constant grind and there was a constant search. So there wasn't really ever a pause to step back and say, "Oh, I'm really screwed if this doesn't happen."
Yeah, yeah. I mean this. I mean this in the nicest possible way, Segun. But you're not normal because most people they're getting rejected like that, and they would just go, "Oh, this is too. How am I ever going to get this?" Even those good moments, like you say, this guy that then turns into them writing you up a deal, which means they take everything. That that's kind of that classic thing. It's the hope that kills you because you think you're just about to get it, and then it gets snatched away from you because it's a bad deal.
Yeah.
And you just got to have some kind of abnormally strong inner belief that it's going to come through at the end.
That. I guess you summarized it perfectly because, I mean, I had friends and family. I guess I could say I had family who put after that 250 came in, or they were like co-investors for me from the beginning. But obviously, mining is an industry that's just so expensive that I couldn't rely on that funding. So these guys who I would talk to again would be like, "Oh no, no, keep going, keep believing." And actually, funny story, I'd forgotten about all this until I started this interview. The guy who actually set me up to take the project from me and structure everything, I remember his advisor meeting me again after I had paid that 250 grand. And then I took the meeting anyway, not telling him. And I sat there and then he was like, "Look, the way it's structured, nobody's going to pay this guy $250,000 cash and expect to then start working. I think you've got to beat him down to 50 grand. And then that's why and he was basically telling me I didn't know what I was doing and how to structure the deal. And then I actually opened this cardboard folder I had because I was preparing for this moment, and I showed him the payment confirmation slip from HSBC. I said, "Oh, by the way, I wired him that 250 grand 3 weeks ago." Yeah. So then he was just stunned.
How good did you feel when you did that?
Oh, I felt great. And it was really bad because my business partner at the time really wanted to be in that meeting for that moment, but he had to go to Senegal. So I took that meeting by myself and took all that glory. But then, as I said, after that, it's been that you would think was probably should be the hardest moment of Thor, but it hasn't been. My Nigeria acquisition was a few magnitudes larger than that.
Really?
Yeah.
What you mean financially, or in terms of how difficult it was?
Financially stressful. I can just give you a background on this deal. When the gold price started going the wrong way, it was really hard to raise money. So my great project in Senegal, I had to mothball for a while, I had to make redundancies, which is never nice. And I was now a public company, and my chairman was like, "Look, why don't you just put a bullet in it, and you've given it a good go." And he actually stepped off the board. He no longer became my chairman, and so I was and then my business partner at the time, who I'd known from university, he had enough and jumped ship. So, but I had put so much emotional energy and family support and finances into this that I just couldn't walk away. So I was looking for something that would breathe a new life into the company. And I knew of this project in Nigeria from when I started the company like 5 years beforehand. It was the most famous gold project in Nigeria. It had 500,000 ounces of gold in it, which is like $600 million worth of gold that had never been built. And I never realized why it hadn't been built, because that was the benchmark. Like if that had ever been built, I'd go into Nigeria and find something similar. So I just Googled it and I found out this project was locked in this legal fight between a Nigerian local party and an Australian company. And these guys were fighting and they had gone to arbitration and the project had just stalled. And to make things even more complicated, they had this young guy who had turned up claiming to have all this money and to be backed by some Indonesian billionaires. He was going to buy them out, and he paid a deposit, and he moved uh, all the shares into escrow. So everything was locked. No one could do anything with this. So I just Googled first the Australian company. I managed to get in touch with the CEO. They were a bit skeptical, and they wanted they couldn't stand the other two parties, so they couldn't be in the same room. Then in Nigeria, everyone's a couple of phone calls away, so I found out someone from the Nigerian party, and then the young guy who was the one who had kind of made everything so painful after they thought it reached a resolution. Um, he actually went to SOAS while I was at Imperial, so I had bumped into him before in the past. So I had to do this three-way negotiation with three people who couldn't stand each other and who owed each other money and all that. And in the long and short of it, I had to raise like $4 million in cash. And at this point, I had no money or any idea where it was going to come from. And I had to prove to them that I had a bank who would lend me the money to build the infrastructure. So this took, so, oh, mate, talking through this is actually quite painful. So not too painful, but I managed to reach terms with the Australian party. So I'd be waking up at like 1 a.m. And negotiating, agree terms with them, agree terms with the Nigerian party. And then the young guy, when they finally agreed terms, while we were waiting for stock exchange approval, he went ahead and filed an injunction to stop these guys doing the deal because he didn't think he was getting a fair deal. And then we all had to renegotiate with him. But like that Senegalese story, it came back to, if he hadn't done that, I don't know what I'd have done, because at that time I didn't have the cash to pay out. I was still running around fundraising, trying to raise money.
Trying to find this 4 million, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to get this 4 million. And then by the time they managed to renegotiate with him and all that, we announced that we had signed a deal, and then my share price popped.
Wow.
And then when it popped, then it was a lot easier to raise money. And then I literally got the money in literally a month after that, and then we closed the deal. So yeah, it was that was even more stressful than the Senegalese, and that took 15 months out of my life doing that.
I mean, what made you think that you would be able to resolve this dispute that had been kind of ongoing? And again, I say it again, Segun, and I mean it in the nicest way. You're not normal. This is, a situation that has not been able to be resolved. And you jump in and you go, yeah, I think I can do this and get these guys moving. And you end up doing it. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
So the Australian guys, the way I looked at it, they had spent on the project something like $11 million. And I was like, look, it's either they walk away or I give them cash. Sorry, part of the deal was I gave them shares in Thor and a royalty. So every bar of gold we produce, we pay them like 1.5% royalty until they get $4 million back. So the cash, the shares, and the royalty means they get their money back. So I was like, these guys either walk away, or if they do a deal with me, they're going to recoup their investment, however long it takes. So that was, and the Australian company had this CEO, this lady who was so angry because the wool had been pulled over her eyes with this young guy saying he was going to buy them out and moving everything into escrow and never paying them, and then being stuck. So suddenly she gets a call from another young Nigerian guy who sounds English, so literally just like him, and she just didn't want to believe. So it took a few times and luckily, obviously Thor had a website and a couple of projects, so luckily we'd moved on, and I was a lot more credible than this guy had been. So yeah, that was the first thing. Then the hardest bit was dealing with the Nigerian company and this young guy. So it was obviously very delicate how to handle him and convince him to do the deal. And the key thing I did at the end was have everyone sign this settlement and release agreement from anything to do with injunctions or fighting and to agree to walk away. So everyone signed. So now everyone's aligned. Now the project has to work for them to all get their money back. And they've got to get their a bulk of their money is in the shares and in the royalty. So if they cause any trouble, then and the project doesn't work, they don't get anything. Yeah.
Right. So it's in their interest now to behave and get on.
Yeah.
So the Australians and the Indonesian guy, we covered how difficult they were. What about the Nigerian party then? What made that so difficult?
Just their expectations.
Okay.
They'd had an Australian party who had come in and spent all this money and had given them a monthly salary just to be on the side and be quiet. And I was telling them, look, I'm essentially a one-man company, but they knew I had a board and all that. Even though my chairman was out the door, I didn't dare say that. And so they just had these huge expectations on valuation and how much money they deserve and all that. And these guys they were nice guys, my parents' generation. And obviously we were speaking every day for like 12 months. All days of the week they'd call me. Friday evenings I'd step out of a restaurant to take their call and all that. So we became friends. So it became harder because we had crossed that business and friendship line. It became harder to say, look, I don't want to do this. Well, I'd say, and because I was young and they were my parents' generation, very culturally in Nigeria as well, you'd have to respect them as well. So for example, I'll give you one example. The royalty, which I was going to cap at $3 million, which I capped at $3 million for them, they wanted it for the life of the mine. They were like, as long as this mine produces, we want 1% of the revenue. And I was like, no. And they were like, why not? I was like, because after I sign this deal with you, I'm still going to have to talk to a bank to borrow the money and all that. And they see stuff like this, they're not going to lend me the money. So, but these are the guys who I've been friendly with, talking on the phone with every day and eating at their house and all that. So we clashed heads a lot of times over that period. And they were extremely difficult, trying to explain to them why things weren't done like that and why I couldn't do things. That was very difficult.
Actually, that kind of takes me back to something you mentioned earlier, where you were out in the jungle on the back of a bike. I mean, what's the kind of the business culture when you go out into the wilderness like that, and you're used to sort of running around the financial capital of the world in London, and I imagine that's a completely different culture out there and can be pretty challenging. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's uncomfortable. Like some places in Nigeria, like almost jungle with some villages bang in the middle of them. Before you walk around there, you go and see a local chief, and you just don't want to be there, but you end up having to be there. Yeah, go see a local chief. I remember once in Burkina Faso, we were literally in this desert in the middle of nowhere, and looking at something that we were saying, should we acquire or not? We ended up not acquiring it, but then the guy was like, okay, now we've seen this, we've got to go pay our respect to this local chief. So we literally drove out to this village, which was literally like 3 small houses or mud huts there. And there were these scraggly chickens running around, and the chief welcomed us, me and my business partner was this white guy. He welcomed us, and he was like, oh, we can't come here and not eat with him. And they just caught one of these scraggly chickens and killed it and cooked it up in this middle of this desert. And it just didn't look that appetizing. And I had to eat. I was like sitting there going, oh my goodness. So I took one bite of this thing and I knew I was going to be in trouble the next, for the next few days. And I was in trouble. But so I've been in some really strange situations like that as well. So it's completely different and then you obviously get your flight back to London, and then you come back and try and sell the project, why it's such a great project here, and no one realizes what you've been through, the last couple of days.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of I don't know if you heard that story about when Trump was out in China. I think it was last year, and he was meeting President Xi in China, and they sat down for a banquet, and this salad came out, and Trump apparently thought the salad did not look good, and he didn't want to eat it, but he didn't want to offend them. So he I don't know if this is really true or if this is an apocryphal story, but the story goes that he kind of leant over to Rex Tillerson, who's no longer there, obviously, and said, "You are going to eat this salad," so that they're not offended, and made him eat the salad.
Yeah.
So I mean, all that has sort of got you to this position now, where it seems like, on the face of it at least, you guys are doing pretty well. So you won some big, what was it, the Indaba Miner of the Year or something? Was that something?
Best emerging mining project in Africa.
Okay, so that's pretty amazing, right? Presumably, that's I get the impression from the outside of your industry that's relatively high profile and will help you in terms of giving you credibility, raising money, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, certainly, it's done us a lot of good. We won it in February, and since then, we've had a lot of wind in our sails. We've got some investors from North America. I don't want to say their names, but pretty big time investors actually flying out to site next week, coming with me, which is unheard of. Their first ever, this big mining fund setting foot in Nigeria for the first time ever in the history of the fund or the history of Nigeria. So yeah, and that's all triggered from this award as well, which I won pretty much almost by accident as well. So
really,
happy. Yeah.
What does that mean by accident?
I guess the week before the conference, I was going to the conference anyway, and it was just like Saturday night watching Match of the Day, and then I saw I was looking at the conference from the year before and the winner, and I saw that company, and so I just wrote up a short profile on the company and our project, and I entered us into the competition thinking not much of it. And then the next day I got a reply saying, "Oh, we really like your company and project. Yeah, we put you into the first round." So I went in, there were like 60 companies competing, and in the first round, it was like you presented for 10 minutes, and then there was a Q&A at the end. And I was telling them about this project in Nigeria, and obviously you have all these investors. It was like a Dragon's Den type of thing, asking you all these questions after your pitch. And then and a lot of the feedback was like, it almost sounds too good to be true. And if it's so good, why isn't there mining in Nigeria? And I took a bit of offense to that. Like, how can it be? I'm here telling you facts, and you're telling me it's too good to be true. So obviously I clarified that why there isn't mining in Nigeria, really because oil has been so easy in Nigeria and all that. And then one of the questions was, how did I get hold of the project? Thinking I had like political connections, asking if there was a tender and all that. I was like, no. And then I told them the story I just told you, the 3-way negotiation I had, and it's all there for everyone to see. And then so it was like 4 rounds, and then the final round was by the time I got to the final round, I just knew that I had such momentum behind me. There wasn't anything anyone could ask me that I wouldn't know. So
that's a really interesting point you make about you were just sat at home and you decided to enter. When you talk to people in business and entrepreneurship and all walks of life, really, who've had any kind of success, it's quite often that kind of story. There's a lot of luck that comes into it, or maybe it's not luck, but you just go, oh yeah, I'm just gonna put myself in the mix and see what comes of it. And I think that's really important. You've always got to put yourself in the mix because, well, you've got to be in it to win it, that old saying. But so many people don't bother trying, and of course, if you're not in there, you're never gonna get the chance to be successful. And maybe in a sense, it also kind of relaxes you a bit because you think you're not going to win it, so you kind of, you don't put too much emphasis on it. You carry on with your business and hope for the best.
I remember in the final was down to 4 companies, and the guy sitting next to me, I had met his chairman about a year and a half ago. He was like a famous miner, and I'd followed that company and looked at their website and tried to model like what we do on them and all that. So when I was sitting next to the CEO, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm in the final with these guys. It was like almost like, okay, I've got this momentum behind me, but I'm not quite there yet. But when I actually to emerge from that and to beat them, and afterwards, it just kind of, it gave me that validation that, okay, yeah, it's been a tough few years. to get here, but you're doing the right thing and you're onto something good.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. Amazing. And so you're in a pretty good position now. I think you guys, are you looking at listing on AIM in London?
It's an option. It's an option. Yeah, we want to start construction later on this year, which needs about $75 million. So it's more than I've ever raised before.
Yes, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And where would that be? Would be for this Segun project?
Yeah, that's our Segun project in Nigeria.
Yeah, okay.
And right now since we acquired it, we've been drilling it and we've been finding more gold. So we haven't closed it out at depth. So hopefully we're hoping over the next few months, we continue doing on the same trajectory we have been on. And then we raise the money to build it. So that's why we've got investors flying out next week.
Right. So in terms of the ease with which you can raise money now, it's clearly a lot better than it was when you first started, but still raising money is never easy, and raising $75 million, wow. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's easier to raise more money than it is to raise small amounts of money.
Hopefully it is. I think, but one thing I've found out from being an entrepreneur, the hardest thing in business isn't all the spreadsheets or the modeling or the marketing. I think the hardest thing in business is to convince someone to hand over $1, of hard-earned money to you. It's just been anything else. I've hired people who have MBAs and who've worked in banks for 15 years and all that, and they do fancy spreadsheets and lovely presentations with nice colors and have business lunches. But at the end of the day, if you need capital to advance your company or your project, you've got to believe in it, because and if you believe in it, this is what I think my successful fundraising comes from. I find that if you don't believe in your project or your company and you have to put on a spin, you can get caught out. But if you believe in something so much and you know the facts, you literally don't have to tell any lies. Anyone could ask me any question in this investment battlefield in Daba, for example, and I'd have the answers, just roll off my tongue, because that's how passionate I was about it. So, and I found, as difficult as fundraising has been, that's what's got me over the line each time, just my belief and my passion in what I'm doing.
Yeah. Amazing. That kind of actually makes me think of, like, when you're younger and you do job interviews and you have to do exercises and presentations, and that feeling that you just talked about getting caught out and being nervous about it, that completely resonated with me. But then, like you say, when you're doing your own project, because you're passionate about it and you believe in it so much, it just becomes so much easier. And of course, you kind of, at that stage, you kind of go, yeah, if you don't believe in it, fine. I've got such belief in this. I know someone else is going to back this.
So, yeah, I'm on the same page as you there, definitely. I guess I'm sounding all happy now, but it's even now I still have sleepless nights. You do worry a lot. It changed my personality a bit. I always put on a brave face when I'm out with my friends and all that, but yeah, the lows were very low and still can get very low, and I guess the highs are very high as well.
Do you have people that you do talk to about it? Do you speak to your family about it?
Yeah, but obviously my wife has been unbelievably supportive. Started this business in our first year of marriage, and it's all she's known since. So she's been extremely supportive, and we've sat around the table and say, should I give up? Should we give up? We've had that conversation a number of times, and obviously my parents as well, huge support, who I refer to. But I do come from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandfather was one, my father was one, and I guess they know, they've been through a lot of everything I've been through. They've been through as well. My father in particular, so he was like, look, a lot of the times when I remember once I was scribbling some notes down, or if to pack it in compared to a job, pros and cons on each, and I'd forgotten it. So when he saw it, And it was like, look, you're literally going to come back in 5 years' time and look back and say, why was I worrying about this? Because something will work out. He's always been like that. He's never once, even when my chairman was like, make these redundancies, he was like, look, even if you have to raise money to keep your staff and they're not working, do it. Obviously, I didn't take that advice, but he was just of the opinion never once that it wasn't going to work out. He was never of the opinion it wasn't going to work out. So,
and that just coming from someone who's gone through it and ended up doing well at the end, that's so powerful. Because I know my experience, you kind of, when you're trying to make something work and a lot of it isn't working, and you think, oh my God, this is never going to work out. And then you look at older people who are successful, and the most successful people in the world, they've all been through that, right? But you don't think that. Maybe a handful of them have just been lucky and it worked for them the first time, but that's a real minority. But you got to remember those guys who are super successful, they've been along this journey exactly and probably a number of times. And it's very difficult to see that when you're stuck in the middle of, when it's really tough for you. But it's, and it does require a certain mindset. I think you've got to be fundamentally optimistic. You've got to believe that it'll work out. Like your father saying to you, oh yeah, this is definitely going to work out. I mean, maybe the data points the other way, maybe actually the data says that most people don't end up.
And that was always my counter argument to him. I was like, look, do you know how many mining companies fail? How many, even if I did raise the money and I drilled and there wasn't enough gold there to build a mine, that's another risk, but I just don't know what the underlying belief he had as well, so I'm glad I stuck to it. But I say that I'm still not nearly at the finish line, so I don't want to. Yeah, I still got to find $75 million and build this thing, and then
Yeah. And I say this. I think I've said this pretty much on all of these podcasts that I've done. That success is not a linear path, right? It's not that you have difficulties at the beginning and then it just is super smooth along the way forever. Not at all. Once you get your big success, you're going to have problems after that. There's always going to be stuff to deal with. There are going to be things that go wrong. It doesn't just end up being super smooth the whole time. And you've got to love doing it, right? You've got to love the ups and downs, or at least you've got to love the ups that come after the downs much more than you hate the downs. Otherwise, don't be doing this, it's because it'll kill you. I mean, pretty much literally. So, okay, Segun, what the next steps, I guess, you've got to go out and raise the $75 million, and that's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy, but we're drilling and we should have results coming out sort of like on a monthly basis, and hopefully those results continue to stack up. We had a cracking set. The first set were really cracking. So if they continue to stack up, then it'll make raising money a lot easier.
Beautiful. And this will keep you busy for the next, how long, this project?
Well, the building it will start in October and it'll take 15 months to build. So we'll be pouring our first bar of gold in the first quarter of 2020. So another 2 years, sort of, just under 2 years.
Amazing. And are they going to be stamped with your face or something, these bars of gold?
No, but I'll definitely commission a couple of coins.
Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
And then after it's built, the project should produce gold for about 10 to 15 years. The question is, do I want to still do this or do I want to look for my next adventure at that point? But yeah, that'll be a Hollywood problem when that comes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Shane, I wish you the best of luck with that. I'm going to let you get on with raising that 75 million because, this.
If you want to throw something in, I'll be really grateful, yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had that kind of money. I would definitely throw some in because I believe in it 100%. It sounds like an amazing project. Thank you so much. I think our listeners are going to find this really interesting and valuable. And I wish you the best of luck, Segun.
Thank you very much, Dom. Great speaking.